The Afghan mountains were silent, that night too silent for comfort. The wind swept through the jagged ridges, carrying with it a biting chill that cut through the thick fabric of combat uniforms. 24 Navy SEALs crouched in formation near the open cargo door of a transport helicopter, weapons ready, faces hidden behind black masks. Inside the hum of the engines, the air was thick with focus and adrenaline. Commander Jack Blake stood near the cockpit, arms crossed over his chest, his eyes fixed on the digital map flickering before him. He was a man built for chaos, sharp, unflinching, the kind who'd stared death in the face so many times that fear had become a familiar companion. But tonight, even he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. "Coordinates are locked," said Lieutenant Cross, the team's navigator, his voice steady through the comms. "Insertion point Bravo, 2 clicks from the target compound." Blake nodded. "Copy that. We go in silent, no deviations. In and out before dawn." At the rear of the aircraft, the men checked their gear one last time. Rifles, ammo, water packs, everything was accounted for. Yet beneath their steel-hard discipline, a few exchanged glances. The mission briefing had been rushed. The intel had been shaky. And that intel had come from her Dr. Erin Shaw. Back at the forward operations base, Erin sat alone in a dimly lit control room, her gaze locked on the satellite feed. Lines of code scrolled across her monitor as she cross-referenced drone imagery with intercepted radio chatter. Her brown hair was tied into a messy knot, dark circles framing her sharp, intelligent eyes. She wasn't a soldier, but she'd spent years analyzing battlefield data, predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. When she'd warned the SEALs that something felt off about this mission, about how quiet the enemy compound had been, how quickly the intel had fallen into their hands, Commander Blake had dismissed her. "You're overthinking it," he had said flatly, not even looking up from his tablet. "We've done this 100 times." "I'm not overthinking, Commander," Erin had replied, her tone calm but firm. "The enemy's radio silence isn't normal. It's deliberate. They want us to think the area's clear. You're walking into a trap." Blake's smirk had been polite, but dismissive. "You stick to your screens, Doc. Let us handle the field." Now, hours later, as she watched their blips move steadily across the radar, she couldn't shake the dread in her chest. Numbers didn't lie. Something was coming. Inside the helicopter, the red cabin lights flashed, signaling 2 minutes to drop. The team rose as one, checking silencers and gear. Blake looked over them, his brothers, his responsibility. Each man knew the risks. Each man trusted the mission. "Eyes up, boys," he said. "Let's bring our people home." The rotor blades screamed as the chopper dipped low, gliding toward a narrow valley cloaked in darkness. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels. Only the faint hum of night vision goggles and the whisper of movement broke the stillness. At the command center, Erin zoomed in on the satellite feed. For a moment, everything appeared normal. The thermal signatures were stable, no visible movement near the target structure. Then something flickered. A brief pulse of heat in the upper ridges, too coordinated to be random. She leaned forward. No, that's not right," she whispered. She typed rapidly, adjusting the filters. More heat signatures appeared, tiny dots multiplying across the screen. Dozens of them. She froze. It wasn't a quiet outpost. It was an ambush. Her headset crackled. "Eagle 1, status check?" she said urgently. Static replied. The chopper had just crossed into blackout range. Erin's pulse spiked. She turned to the communications officer on duty. "Patch me into their backup channel now." "Dr. Shaw, you're not cleared for." "Do it," she snapped. The officer hesitated, then complied. The signal connected just long enough for her voice to cut through the static. Eagle 1, this is Command Analyst Shaw. Abort. You're flying into enemy position multiple tangos inbound. But it was too late. The valley below erupted. Tracer rounds ripped through the night like red comets. The helicopter lurched violently as rounds struck the fuselage. "We're hit. We're hit," shouted the pilot. Smoke filled the cabin. The SEALs gripped their harnesses as the aircraft spun sideways, the roar of gunfire drowning everything else. "Brace!" Blake yelled. The helicopter smashed into the rocky slope with a deafening crunch. Metal screamed as it skidded through the dirt and came to rest half buried in debris. The silence that followed was sharp and cruel. Blake's ears rang. He tasted blood. Status. He barked, shaking off the daze. 3 wounded. 2 Kier. Came a voice from the back. Another man was dragging a body out of the wreck. Flames flickered dangerously near leaking fuel. "Move! Get out of here!" Blake shouted. The SEALs scrambled from the wreckage, setting up a defensive perimeter. Night vision goggles illuminated shadowy figures advancing from the ridge. The enemy knew exactly where they were. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup. Contact left. Someone yelled. Bullets sprayed across the rocks. The SEALs returned fire with precision, cutting through the darkness. Blake crouched behind cover, trying to raise HQ. "Command, this is Eagle 1. We've been compromised. Request immediate evac." All he got was static. Back at base, Erin's heart pounded as she listened to the broken transmissions. The other officers stared, pale and speechless. No one wanted to say what they all knew, that their best team had just been dropped into a death trap. She jumped to her feet. "We need to scramble rescue units now." The general on duty turned sharply. "Dr. Shaw, you're out of line." "Sit down." "Out of line?" She shot back. 24 men are trapped because you ignored the data. I warned you this was a setup. Enough." He snapped. "We'll assess the situation before." Erin slammed her fist on the console. "There's nothing to assess. If we wait, they die." Her voice echoed through the room, raw and furious. But the general simply looked away, muttering into his radio for protocol confirmation. Erin's chest heaved with anger. She turned back to the screen smoke, heat, movement. The SEALs were surrounded. One signal blinked, then vanished. Then another. "God," she whispered. "They're going dark." In the valley, Blake and his men fell back toward a cluster of boulders. Every few seconds, another explosion rocked the ground. The enemy was advancing in waves, confident and relentless. Lieutenant Cross crawled beside him, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "Command's not responding?" "Nothing but static," Blake said grimly. "We're on our own." He knew what that meant. No evac, no air support. Just 24 men fighting against impossible odds. As he reloaded his rifle, a fragment of Erin's voice echoed in his mind her warning, her calm insistence that something was off. He had laughed it off, certain of his own instincts. Now, looking at the carnage around him, he realized she'd been right. He whispered to himself, "I should have listened." Miles away, Erin sat in front of the dimming monitors, eyes red from staring too long. The feed flickered again, then stabilized just enough for her to spot faint blips moving toward the east ridge. Some were SEALs. Some weren't. She opened a new channel. "If you can hear me," she whispered, "you're not alone." "Hold on," no one replied. But somewhere deep in the mountains, a faint light blinked on a damaged comm unit, unnoticed by the men fighting for their lives. It was the first fragile thread of hope, and the beginning of Erin Shaw's silent war. The first light of dawn crept across the peaks, painting the Afghan sky in ghostly gray. Smoke curled lazily from the crashed helicopter below, the metallic frame twisted and blackened by fire. The air reeked of burning fuel and blood. Commander Jack Blake crouched behind a fallen boulder, scanning the horizon through his rifle scope. The valley that had seemed empty just hours ago now swarmed with enemy fighters. They were closing in like wolves. His headset hissed and popped with static. Cross report. No response. He turned to his right, where Lieutenant Cross lay slumped against a rock, his shoulder bandaged with a torn sleeve. His lips moved faintly. They were waiting, sir. They knew we were coming. Blake clenched his jaw. Save your breath, Lieutenant. We'll get you out. But deep inside, he knew the truth. There was no out. The radios were dead. The extraction bird had been shot down, and the enemy had every exit sealed. The only thing keeping them alive was movement and cover. And both were running out. At the base command center, chaos erupted. Screens flickered, comm channels overloaded, and the air filled with overlapping voices. Lost visual on Eagle 1, shouted one operator. Thermal feeds gone. Another yelled. Dr. Aaron Shaw stood at the far end of the operations room, arms crossed tightly, as she watched the disaster unfold in real time. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. She knew this would happen. Every number, every intercepted radio line, every dead zone had pointed to an ambush. But no one had listened. Where's the rescue authorization? She demanded. A major shook his head. Command's assessing options. Airspace is too hot for support. Erin slammed her hand against the console. Assessing options? They're dying out there. Her outburst drew glares from several officers. Dr. Shaw, you are not military personnel. Stand down. She ignored them and leaned over a nearby operator. Pull up satellite channel Delta 7. Focus on Sector 12B East Ridge. The young man hesitated. Ma'am, I don't have clearance. Then use mine, she snapped, entering her override code before he could protest. The screen flared to life, revealing a sweeping overhead view of the valley. She zoomed in. Their tiny flashes of movement. Heat signatures moving in formation, closing in around a cluster of smaller blips. 24 lives being surrounded 1 meter at a time. Erin's throat tightened. They've got less than an hour. Back in the valley, the SEALs fought tooth and nail. Gunfire echoed off the stone walls, a thunderous rhythm that never seemed to end. Each man moved with precision, years of training guiding their every instinct. But even the best training couldn't stop the inevitable. Reloading, shouted Sergeant Kane, slamming a new magazine into his rifle. His arm was bleeding, but his eyes stayed sharp. Beside him, Petty Officer Ramos dragged the wounded Cross behind cover as explosions rained down nearby. Blake, Ramos yelled. We're pinned. They've got us zeroed in from both sides. Blake ducked as a bullet chipped the rock inches from his head. He looked toward the ridge and saw silhouettes shifting among the rock's enemy snipers. We're pulling back west, he ordered. Smoke grenades now. The valley filled with gray mist as the SEALs threw smoke canisters. The moment the haze thickened, they moved silent, fast, and low. But the enemy wasn't fooled for long. Mortar shells whistled overhead, slamming into the earth with bone-shattering force. Blake's ears rang as he hit the dirt. Everyone check in, he barked. One by one, voices responded, some weak, some panicked. But 2 names never came through. He felt the weight of command press on him like never before. He was responsible for every man here, and he'd led them into hell. Back at HQ, Erin had already bypassed 3 firewalls to access the drone feeds. She wasn't supposed to have that kind of control, but she didn't care. What mattered now was finding them fast. The drone's camera swept across the smoking wreckage, past scattered debris, until it locked onto movement near the canyon's edge. There they were, faint, flickering shapes amid the smoke. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Come on, come on. Give me a signal. A weak transponder blip answered, barely audible, but there. She isolated the frequency, boosted the gain, and connected it to an emergency channel. The line crackled. Eagle One, this is Shaw. Do you copy? She said, static. Then, faintly, Shaw? Blake's voice was rough, shocked. How the hell? There's no time, she cut in. You're surrounded. I can guide you toward an escape route, but you need to move now. Blake hesitated, crouched behind the rock with bullets screaming past. We've got wounded. Then move slower, Erin said firmly. But move. You've got 30 minutes before they close the valley. Blake exhaled. Copy that. We'll follow your lead. The SEALs regrouped behind the ridge, following Erin's voice through the combs. She guided them through terrain she had memorized from thousands of satellite passes. Every turn, every shadow, every slope, they were her domain. 200 meters north, she instructed. There's a dry riverbed that leads into a cave system. You can use it for cover. Roger that, Blake said, signaling the team forward. They moved like ghosts through the smoke, carrying the wounded, conserving ammo. The cave entrance appeared just as she said, hidden behind an outcrop of stone and brush. Inside, the air was damp and cold. It smelled of earth and old rain. The men collapsed against the walls, gasping for breath. For a moment, they were safe. Blake leaned against the cave wall, helmet off, sweat running down his face. Dr. Shaw, he said, voice rough through the headset. How did you? I tracked you through your distress beacon, she said quickly. The signal's faint, but it's enough. He let out a dry laugh. Guess I owe you an apology. You can save it for later, Erin replied. Right now, we need to figure out how to get you out. At the command center, alarms blared again. Erin's unauthorized access had triggered system alerts. The general stormed in, red-faced. Dr. Shaw. Step away from that console. She stood her ground. Sir, I've got communication with Commander Blake. They're alive. I said step away. He barked. You're violating chain of command. They're 24 American soldiers. She shouted. And if you'd listened to me, they wouldn't be dying in a valley right now. The room went silent. The general's glare hardened, but before he could reply, another operator called out, Sir, we've got movement on satellite Delta 7 enemy reinforcements en route. Erin turned back to the screen. The blips were multiplying again. Dozens more hostiles marching straight toward the cave. Her pulse spiked. They're closing in. If we don't extract them within the hour, they're gone. The general hesitated, torn between pride and reason. Erin saw his doubt and took her chance. She whispered, Then I'll do it myself. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed her laptop, disconnected the feed, and walked out of the operations room. No one followed. They were too stunned to move. In the cave, the SEALs rested for only a few minutes before Blake's radio crackled again. Commander, you've got incoming, Erin's voice said, sharp and steady. Hundreds of meters and closing fast. I'll find you a new path. Negative, Blake replied. We're low on ammo, and half our men can't walk. We make our stand here. Don't be a fool, she snapped. You can't win this. There was a pause, then Blake said quietly, We can delay them. Buy time. But if you've got any ideas, now's the time to use them. Erin looked at her maps, her code, her screens. None of it mattered anymore. The men she'd tried to warn were now trapped in a place she had predicted would be their grave. She felt the weight of responsibility crash down like a mountain. "I'll find a way," she whispered to herself. "I'm not losing them." As she walked out toward the landing pads, the first helicopter engines roared to life behind her, her next move already forming. She knew the risks. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she didn't act, every one of those 24 men would die before nightfall. The operations base had gone quiet. The hum of computers, the beeping of radar screens, the low chatter of officers, all had faded to a tense silence. Dr. Erin Shaw stood alone in the corridor outside the command center, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could still hear fragments of the last conversation echoing in her mind. Blake's voice, strained and half-broken, promising to hold the line. She had promised to find them a way out. Now she had to make good on that promise. The hallway lights flickered as she passed through the restricted wing of the base. Soldiers glanced up from their posts, unsure what to make of the civilian scientist striding past them with purpose. Her ID badge swung from her neck, her tablet pressed against her chest. She looked like she belonged there, and that confidence kept anyone from stopping her. She entered her private analysis room, sealed the door, and activated her personal terminal. The system beeped awake, casting a blue glow across her face. Lines of encrypted data scrolled upward: enemy positions, drone paths, satellite footage, all Lev. She'd memorized the patterns over months of study, and now she began connecting the threads. "Come on," she whispered, typing furiously. "Show me a way in." For 10 minutes, she traced every canyon, every ravine, every possible extraction route. One by one, they were ruled out. Too narrow, too heavily guarded, too steep. The Taliban fighters had cut off every known exit from the valley. Then something caught her eye, an anomaly on the satellite feed. A stretch of terrain, half a mile west of the SEAL's current position. It looked like a dead end until she realized it wasn't. It was an old drainage tunnel from the Soviet era, partially collapsed, but still intact. It ran straight beneath the ridge and opened onto an abandoned riverbed far enough from enemy patrols to risk a rescue. Her pulse raced. That's it. She leaned closer, enlarging the feed, tracing every contour. If she could get coordinates to Blake, the SEALs could move under the enemy's radar. But it would require precise timing and live satellite guidance, and that meant she'd need direct access to the command satellites. Only a senior officer could authorize that, and there wasn't one left willing to listen to her. Erin's decision came quickly. She packed her tablet, loaded her field laptop, and headed for the flight deck. The sun was sinking low outside, painting the desert base in shades of red and gold. She could hear the faint roar of engines from the hangars. Supply helicopters were being prepped for a late-night run. A familiar voice called after her. "Doc, you're not cleared for the flight line." She turned to see Lieutenant Rodriguez, a young pilot she'd worked with on earlier missions. He looked confused, wiping grease from his hands. "What are you doing down here?" "I need a bird," she said firmly. "One that can fly low and fast." He frowned. "Orders?" "Not exactly," she admitted. "But there are 24 SEALs trapped out there, and no one's doing a damn thing." Rodriguez hesitated. "You're serious?" "As serious as a heart attack." For a long second, he studied her face. Then, with a slow grin, he said, "You know this is suicide, right?" She smiled faintly. "Then let's make it count." While Rodriguez prepped the helicopter, Erin linked her laptop to the aircraft's navigation system. She uploaded her coordinates, satellite maps, and terrain overlays. Every detail of the valley flashed across the screens. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. As they lifted off, the desert wind whipped against the glass. The base lights shrank behind them, fading into the night. Erin put on a headset, her voice steady. "We'll approach from the west ridge. Keep low. They'll have anti-air batteries covering the main canyon." Rodriguez nodded, adjusting altitude. "Roger that." The helicopter hugged the contours of the terrain, dipping between dark ridges. The rhythmic thrum of the rotors was the only sound. Erin stared at her laptop, watching the blinking dots that marked the SEAL's last known position. One by one, those dots had faded since dawn. Only 12 remained, now 12 out of 24. She swallowed hard. "Hang on, Blake. Just hang on." Down in the valley, Commander Blake crouched inside the cave, radio pressed to his ear. The signal was weak, but Erin's voice was there clearer than before. "Commander," she said, "I've found a way out. There's a tunnel system west of your position, marked by a ridge with an old Russian marker. It'll take you under the enemy perimeter." Blake frowned. "That area's unstable. My men won't make it." "Your men won't make it anywhere else," Erin countered. "They're closing in from all sides." He looked around at his team. Faces covered in grime, eyes hollow from exhaustion. The wounded were pale and silent. They had fought for nearly 20 hours without rest. They needed hope. Blake exhaled slowly. "You're sure it's there?" 100%, she said. "But you have to move now. I'm inbound with limited air support." He blinked in disbelief. "You're what?" "I'm coming to get you," she replied simply. The words hit him harder than any explosion. "You're not a field agent, Shaw." "I know," she said. "But right now, I'm all you've got." For a moment, Blake said nothing. Then he gave a tired, humorless laugh. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." "Save the compliments," Erin replied. "You'll need them when we make it out alive." At the base, the alarm went off again. Unauthorized flight detected. The control tower scrambled to contact the rogue aircraft, but Erin ignored every transmission. The general's voice cracked over the radio. "Return immediately or be shot down." Rodriguez looked at her nervously. "They mean it." "I know," she said quietly. "Keep flying." "Doc," she turned to him, eyes blazing. "If we stop now, they die. If they shoot us down, at least we tried." Rodriguez hesitated, then pushed the throttle forward. "Then let's hope they miss." As the helicopter neared the valley, the night sky lit up with gunfire. Tracers arced through the darkness, fiery streaks painting the air. Rodriguez weaved through them expertly, the aircraft rolling and banking. Erin clutched her laptop, monitoring the SEAL's position. They were moving slowly, painfully, toward the tunnel she had found. "Keep going west," she radioed. "You're close." 100 meters. Blake's breath came heavy over the combs. "We see it." Moving in. The sound of explosions filled the channel. Erin's heart clenched. "Blake?" "Still here," he gasped. "We've got hostiles on our tail." 30 seconds, she said. "Then you're under cover." The helicopter shook violently as a rocket exploded nearby. Metal screamed, alarms blaring in the cockpit. Rodriguez cursed, fighting to keep control. "We're hit." Erin gripped the seat. "Can we still fly?" "Barely," he said through gritted teeth. "But I'm not landing yet." Erin switched to Blake's channel. "You've got to move faster." "Almost there," came the reply. Seconds later, Blake and his remaining men vanished beneath the ridge into the darkness of the tunnel. Erin watched the radar and saw the enemy signatures lose track of them. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The chopper circled above the ridge, trailing smoke. Rodriguez's face was slick with sweat. "We can't stay here long." "I just need to confirm they're clear," Erin said, scanning the feed. Through the grainy infrared, she saw them tiny heat signatures moving deeper underground, alive, safe for now. Her throat tightened. They made it. It's... Rodriguez grinned weakly. Now what? She looked out the window toward the mountains. Now we make sure they get out. Back in the cave system, Blake leaned against the wall, panting. The tunnel stretched ahead into blackness, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. He looked at his radio, the faint sound of Erin's breathing still in his ear. He pressed the button, Shaw. You saved us. On the other end, her voice came soft, steady. Not yet, Commander. But we're getting there. Then the signal cut out, leaving only static, and the realization that the woman they had once ignored was now the only one keeping them alive. The tunnel swallowed them whole. Commander Blake could hear nothing but the ragged breath of his men and the soft, distant rumble of gunfire echoing through the rock. The air was thick with dust and the scent of burned gunpowder. Every step forward felt like a gamble. One false move could bring the entire structure crashing down. Light sticks now, he ordered quietly. Green glow illuminated the space, revealing walls slick with moisture and cracked from age. Soviet inscriptions half erased by timeline a passage. It was narrow, forcing the men to move single file, their rifles clutched tight. The sound of dripping water echoed like footsteps in the dark. How far does this thing go, sir? Asked Petty Officer Daniels, his voice shaky. Blake checked the map Erin had sent through before the signal dropped. If she's right, it leads out to an old riverbed about a mile west. And if she's wrong? Blake paused, looking at the faces of the 12 men still alive. Then we dig our own way out. They kept moving. Every few meters, they stopped to listen. Enemy shouts drifted faintly from behind them, distant, but closing. The Taliban had found the cave entrance. They would soon realize the SEALs had gone underground. Blake quickened the pace. Double time. Let's move. The tunnel bent sharply to the left, revealing a wider chamber. There, the men collapsed for a brief rest. Wounded SEALs leaned against the cold stone, wrapping makeshift bandages around arms and legs. One of them, Miller, had taken shrapnel to his shoulder. He winced as Blake tightened the cloth. You ever think, Miller muttered, that the only person looking out for us would be a scientist? Blake smirked faintly. Life's full of surprises. Guess we owe her a drink if we make it out. Blake didn't answer. He just tightened the bandage, then looked up toward the cracked ceiling. Water dripped steadily, each drop echoing like a ticking clock. They didn't have long. Above them, Erin Shaw sat inside the battered helicopter, her laptop balanced on her knees. The rotor had stopped. Smoke still rose from the damaged tail, and Rodriguez was outside inspecting the wreckage. They'd made an emergency landing behind a ridge 5 miles from the valley. Her hands trembled as she tried to re-establish the signal. Come on, she whispered, typing furiously. Static hissed through her headset. The satellite feed was patchy, the signal bouncing off the surrounding cliffs. Rodriguez climbed back into the cockpit, shaking his head. We're not flying again, Doc. Tail rotors toast. She didn't look up. Can we call base? They're already calling us, he said grimly, showing her the blinking screen. Command's furious. Erin sighed, pushing a strand of hair from her face. Let them be. They'll court-martial us for this. If those men die, I won't care what they do to me. Rodriguez stared at her, then nodded slowly. Then what's the plan? Find a signal. Guide them out, she said. If we can't fly them out, we'll walk them out. You really think 12 wounded SEALs can make it through that valley on foot? Her eyes lifted, fierce and determined. They've done the impossible before. So have I. Back underground, the SEALs moved again. Their flashlights flickered. The air grew colder. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting deeper into the earth. Several times, they heard distant crashes sections collapsing behind them. The sound drove them forward like hunted animals. "Sir," Daniels whispered, "the radio's dead. We've lost contact." Blake nodded grimly. "Then we trust the map." But the map was only a projection. Without real-time data, it was little more than guesswork. Blake looked at the walls, searching for any sign of airflow or change in temperature. Then he felt a faint breeze brushing past his cheek. "Wind," he said quietly. "There's an opening ahead." They followed it, step by step, until they reached a collapsed section. Large stones blocked the path, dust thick in the air. The tunnel had caved in just short of the exit. The men stared at it in disbelief. Hope crumbled faster than the ceiling above them. Miller slammed his fist against the wall. "We're done." Blake didn't answer right away. He knelt, running his hand along the rock. It wasn't solid stone. It was loose shale, compacted dirt. It could be cleared. "Not yet," he said. "We dig." The men stared at him, exhausted. But when he started clawing at the rubble, one by one, they joined him. Fingers bled, nails broke, sweat poured down faces, but they dug. On the ridge above, Erin's laptop beeped a faint signal spike. She froze, eyes wide. "That's them." She zoomed in on the coordinates. The heat signatures were faint, but visible beneath the mountain. They were alive and moving. "Rodriguez, I found them." He rushed over. "Then what?" "They're trapped under a collapse. I can see the pocket. They're 20 meters from the exit." Rodriguez frowned. "You can't do anything from here." Her mind raced. "Unless?" She opened a secondary channel, linked to the base's emergency comm satellite. It was risky. It would expose her location. But it was the only way to relay coordinates to Rescue Command. She typed furiously, encrypting the data, attaching her authorization codes. Then she hit send. Within seconds, a red warning flashed on her screen. Unauthorized transmission detected. She ignored it. In the operations room back at base, alarms went off. Officers gathered around the monitor as a data feed appeared: live coordinates, terrain analysis, geological scan overlays. General Harkins stormed in. "Who sent this?" "Dr. Shaw," said one of the analysts. "She's transmitting from the crash site." Harkins stared at the screen. The data was clear: an escape route under the ridge, leading to a possible exit point. "Get me a drone over that area," he ordered. "But sir, now." For the first time, the command room was alive again. Screens lit up with feeds, maps, and telemetry data. The same woman they'd dismissed hours ago had reignited the entire operation. Down below, the SEALs kept digging. Their arms trembled, lungs burning. Dust filled their mouths. Then, suddenly, a thin shaft of light broke through the rubble. Blake stopped, his heart hammering. "Light!" he shouted. "We're through." The men redoubled their efforts. Rock after rock fell away until a small gap opened enough for air to rush in. Cold, fresh wind filled the tunnel. It was real. Blake pressed his face close to the hole and saw it, the pale shimmer of moonlight beyond the rocks. They'd made it. "Go, move," he shouted. The first man squeezed through, then another. They crawled one by one until they spilled out onto the open ground of the dry riverbed. The night sky stretched above them, stars scattered like silver shards. For a brief moment, it was beautiful. Then came the sound of engines. Enemy trucks, 3 of them racing toward the ridge. Blake's blood ran cold. Positions. Defend the exit. The men spread out, forming a semicircle. Their ammo was almost gone, but they were alive, and they would fight until the last breath. Erin saw the trucks on her screen. "They've found them." Rodriguez grabbed his rifle. Then so have we. They ran down the slope toward the valley. The sound of engines and gunfire echoed through the night. Erin's lungs burned, her boots sliding on gravel, but she didn't stop. She saw flashes of muzzle fire near the ridge, and she ran faster. When she reached the edge, she saw them figures crawling from the ground, fighting off waves of attackers. Without thinking, she picked up a rifle from a fallen insurgent and took cover beside a rock. Her hands trembled, but she aimed, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her back, but the shot hit true and enemy dropped. Blake looked up from the ridge and froze. "Shaw?" he breathed. She gave a quick, fierce smile. "You didn't think I'd just watch, did you?" The night became chaos. Bullets screamed through the air. Explosions lit the sand, and the mountain thundered like a living beast. But through it all, Erin held her ground beside the seals she had once only studied from afar. By the time the last enemy fell silent, dawn was breaking over the horizon. The seals bloodied, battered, but breathing stood among the rocks. The rising sun painted them in gold. Blake lowered his rifle and turned to Erin. For a moment, words failed him. Then, quietly, he said, "You just saved the United States Navy's finest." Erin smiled faintly, exhausted but unbroken. "No, Commander. I just did my job." The desert morning was silent again. The battle had ended hours ago, but the echoes of gunfire still lingered in Erin's ears. Smoke curled from the burning trucks scattered across the valley. Dust drifted in slow spirals through the air. She sat on a rock, her uniform torn, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Around her, the surviving SEALs moved among the wreckage, gathering weapons, checking the wounded, counting the dead. Out of 24 men, 12 had made it out alive. It wasn't victory, it was survival. Commander Blake approached, limping slightly, his face bandaged. In his eyes, exhaustion and gratitude fought for dominance. "We got a chopper coming in from the base," he said quietly. "They're sending a medevac for the wounded." Erin nodded. "Good. You should get checked out too," he said. "You've been through hell." She gave a faint, tired smile. "I'm fine." He studied her for a long moment. "You saved us all." "Not all," she murmured, glancing toward the bodies lined under tattered tarps. Blake followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "No, but without you, none of us would have made it." Erin said nothing. The weight of his words pressed on her chest, like armor and like guilt. Hours later, the medevac helicopters arrived. Dust blasted across the ground as rotors spun. Paramedics rushed out, loading the wounded. Erin helped where she could, handing off gear, checking vitals, steadying stretchers. When it was her turn to board, she hesitated. The soldiers waved her on, but her eyes lingered on the valley below. The same valley that had almost become a graveyard. Blake appeared behind her. "Let's go, Shaw. You earned the ride." Reluctantly, she climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted into the dawn, the battlefield shrank beneath them, just another scar on the earth. But Erin knew the scars inside would take longer to heal. The debriefing room at Bagram Air Base was sterile and cold. The blinds were drawn, the air stale. Erin sat in a chair across from a long table lined with officers in crisp uniforms. General Harkins sat at the center, face unreadable. "Dr. Shaw," he began, voice calm but sharp. "You knowingly disobeyed direct orders, commandeered military property, and compromised communication security." Erin's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "And I saved 12 American lives." "That's not the point," Harkins snapped. "Your recklessness could have exposed sensitive technology, endangered Allied operations, and, with respect—" "General," she interrupted, "your protocols were going to leave them to die." A murmur rippled through the room. The general's jaw tightened. You're a civilian analyst. You don't get to question tactical command. I didn't question it, Aaron said quietly. I replaced it because no one else would. Harkins leaned forward. You crossed a line. She met his gaze without flinching. Then maybe the line was in the wrong place. Silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Harkins exhaled slowly, then turned to the clerk beside him. Effective immediately. Dr. Aaron Shaw is suspended from duty pending investigation for insubordination, breach of protocol, and unauthorized field operation. Aaron felt her stomach drop. You're punishing me for saving your men? No, Harkins said coldly. We're holding you accountable. Blake, who had been waiting outside, entered just as the verdict was spoken. His face hardened. With all due respect, sir, she deserves a medal, not a suspension. This doesn't concern you, Commander, Harkins said. The hell it doesn't, Blake shot back. She's the reason I'm standing here. You left us to die, and she brought us home. The general's eyes flicked between them. Watch your tone, Commander. You're still under my command. Blake stepped forward. Then command me to say what's right. For a moment, it looked like the general would have him escorted out. But instead, he simply stood and said, Debrief's over. You're dismissed. He left without another word. That night, Aaron sat alone in the barracks, staring at the simple folder that now defined her fate. Disciplinary action. Dr. Aaron Shaw. Outside, soldiers celebrated the rescue. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the distant hum of returning aircraft. She could hear them chanting Blake's name, cheering for the men who'd survived the impossible. Her name was never mentioned. She didn't blame them. She hadn't done it for fame or recognition. But the silence still hurt. Blake found her sitting on the steps outside the barracks, gazing at the desert night. Doc, he said softly, taking a seat beside her. You okay? She gave a faint laugh. You sound like my therapist. He smiled. You could use one. Couldn't we all? They sat in silence for a while, watching the lights of the base flicker against the darkness. Then Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver coin, the kind awarded to soldiers for acts of valor. This is my unit's challenge coin, he said, turning it in his fingers. We give it to people who earn our respect. She blinked. I'm not a soldier. You didn't have to be, he said. You fought harder than most of us. He pressed it into her hand. The metal felt cold, heavy. She looked down at it, her throat tight. Thank you. He nodded. You may not wear a uniform, but you belong with us. For the first time in days, she smiled not out of pride, but relief. The following week, a press release from the Pentagon hit every major news outlet. Operation Iron Shadow, 12 Navy SEALs. Rescued in classified mission. The official statement praised the bravery of the team and the swift actions of command leadership. Aaron's name was nowhere in the report, but the truth had a way of spreading. Whispers began circulating through the ranks. Soldiers talked about the scientist who flew into the valley. A few journalists caught wind of it, and soon an anonymous post appeared online with the headline, "The woman the Navy tried to forget." It spread like wildfire. Videos of her damaged helicopter surfaced. Leaked recordings of her transmissions appeared. Soldiers who had been rescued began to speak publicly, defending her. Blake's statement hit hardest of all. Dr. Aaron Shaw didn't just save lives. She saved faith in what it means to never leave anyone behind. Within days, the Pentagon faced public pressure to respond. In Washington, under the blinding lights of a press conference, General Harkins stood at the podium. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. One voice rose above the noise. "General, is it true a civilian analyst disobeyed orders to save your men?" Harkins hesitated. The room waited. Then, slowly, he said, "Yes." She acted outside the chain of command. But her actions contributed significantly to the mission's success. Will she face punishment? He paused again, the weight of every camera lens on him. No, Dr. Shaw's suspension has been lifted. The crowd erupted with questions, but Harkins simply stepped back from the mic, eyes distant. In that moment, a man who had tried to bury her name realized he couldn't. The truth had already won. A week later, Erin stood in a quiet ceremony on the base runway. The survivors of Iron Shadow lined up in dress uniforms. The air was cool, the sky pale blue. Blake stood beside her as the general approached, medals glinting in the morning light. Harkins looked at her with a mix of regret and respect. "Dr. Shaw," he said quietly, "you forced me to rethink everything I know about command." She gave a small, professional nod. Then maybe it was worth it. He handed her a small box. Inside lay a medal engraved with the words, "For exceptional valor." The seals erupted into applause. Erin stood still, tears threatening but never falling. She didn't want the spotlight, but for the first time, she felt seen. That night, Blake found her in the hangar, gazing at the silent helicopters. "How's it feel?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Strange. I never thought saving lives could feel so heavy." He chuckled. "That's war. You win, but it still takes something from you." She looked at him thoughtfully. "What happens now?" "We go home," he said. "Try to live like people again." She nodded. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I'll make sure they remember who really saved us." Erin looked back toward the desert horizon, where the sun dipped below the dunes. "They won't forget," she said quietly. "Not anymore." The applause had faded, the cameras gone, and the ceremony was just a memory now. Erin Shaw sat alone in her small apartment, overlooking the Potomac River, the Medal of Valor resting on the kitchen table beside a mug of untouched coffee. Outside, Washington, D.C. glittered under the city lights, powerful, polished, and utterly indifferent. She stared at the medal for a long time. To most, it symbolized victory. To her, it felt like unfinished business, because something about the mission still didn't add up. The official report had been released to Congress that morning. Erin had read every word, or rather, every carefully chosen omission. There was no mention of how the SEALs were stranded in the first place. No explanation for the broken communication lines, the delayed air support, or the intelligence failure that had sent them into a trap. It was as if someone wanted the world to believe it was all just an accident. But Erin had been there. She knew accidents didn't feel like that. Precise ambushes, perfectly timed jamming signals, and insider knowledge of American troop movement. That wasn't bad luck. It was betrayal. The next day, she walked into the Pentagon for the first time since her suspension had been lifted. The guards saluted her now. The medal on her chest carried weight, even if she didn't want it. She rode the elevator to the intelligence floor, her stomach tightening with each passing level. When the doors opened, the smell of fresh paint and burnt coffee hit her. The same office she'd once been escorted out of now felt foreign. Analysts nodded respectfully, their faces a mix of awe and curiosity. At her old workstation, she found a sealed envelope marked confidential, for your eyes only. She frowned, glancing around. Who left this? No one answered. She sat down, broke the seal, and unfolded the documents inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The first page contained intercepted communications, not from the Taliban, but from a private military contractor operating in the same region. The transmission logs lined up perfectly with the ambush timeline. Someone had fed the enemy the SEAL's position. And at the bottom of the document, stamped faintly in red, Classified source, internal. Her hands trembled. Internal? That meant the leak came from inside the U.S. command structure. She barely noticed when Commander Blake appeared beside her desk. His presence always carried calm, but today his eyes were sharp, watchful. "You found something, didn't you?" She hesitated, then handed him the file. "These were in my inbox this morning. Someone wants me to see them." He flipped through the pages, brow furrowing deeper with each one. This is bad. "Worse than bad," she said. "It means someone on our side sold the mission out." Blake nodded grimly. "And whoever sent this to you is taking a big risk." They exchanged a look that said what neither wanted to. This isn't over. That night, Erin drove through the rain to a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Arlington. The message that had come through her encrypted email was simple. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. She sat in the back corner, her hood up, her pulse steady but fast. Minutes passed, then a man entered, tall, lean, with salt and pepper hair and a nervous glance that screamed intelligence officer. He spotted her immediately. "You're Dr. Shaw," he said quietly, sliding into the booth opposite her. "And you are?" "Someone who's seen enough to know when a mission report is fiction." She leaned forward. "Then start talking." He looked around, then placed a small flash drive on the table. "You weren't supposed to find those files. They were meant to be buried. The ambush wasn't an accident. It was a test." Her stomach tightened. "A test?" He nodded. "Certain officials inside defense have been running covert field trials for private defense contracts. The SEALs mission zone was deliberately chosen because it overlapped with one of those trial areas." Erin's eyes narrowed. "They used real soldiers to test battlefield systems?" "Yes, and when the operation went wrong, they erased the evidence. Your rescue threw their plan into chaos." She stared at him, disbelief turning to anger. "You're saying 12 men died for a weapons test?" He nodded grimly. "And now they're cleaning up the mess. You've become a liability, Dr. Shaw." Before she could respond, he stood. "Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't go home tonight." Then he vanished into the rain. Erin sat frozen. Her coffee had gone cold, her thoughts racing. She replayed his words in her mind. "You've become a liability." When she finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped. But a black SUV was parked across the street, headlights dimmed. Two silhouettes sat inside, motionless, watching. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to the only place she trusted, Blake's safe house near Quantico, a small cabin tucked between pine trees and silence. When he opened the door and saw her face, his instincts kicked in instantly. "What happened?" She dropped the flash drive on his table. "We were never meant to survive that mission." He stared at her. "You're serious?" "They're covering up a weapons test gone wrong. That ambush, it was staged to see how new drone software would perform under combat. The SEALs were bait." Blake's jaw clenched. "Those bastards." She nodded. "And now they're erasing everyone who knows." He looked at her with a mixture of fury and protectiveness. "Then they'll have to go through me first." For the next 2 days, they hid. Erin decrypted the files on a secure offline system, uncovering more layers of horror. Authorization signatures, test memos, even payment transfers to shell companies tied to government officials. Each file was a nail in the coffin of someone powerful. But the more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Someone was watching her. Every time she connected to a signal, her devices flickered. Every call cut off halfway through. The hunter had become the hunted. Blake stood guard outside the cabin at night, rifle slung over his shoulder. The soldier in him had seen this pattern before, the quiet before the storm. On the third night, it came. It started with the dogs barking down the valley. Then the faint sound of tires crunching gravel. Headlights glowed through the trees. 3 vehicles approaching fast. Blake rushed inside. They found us. Erin grabbed the flash drive, stuffing it into her jacket. We can't let them take this. Go out the back, he ordered. I'll hold them off. She shook her head. I'm not leaving you. Not a request, Doc. He loaded his rifle, eyes locked on hers. If you don't get those files out, those 12 men died for nothing. She hesitated, tears stinging her eyes. Then she nodded. I'll make it count. Blake smiled faintly. You always do. She slipped out the back door, vanishing into the forest as the first gunshots shattered the night. Erin ran. Branches tore at her clothes, the cold air burning her lungs. Behind her, she heard the chaos. Shouts, engines, the crack of gunfire. Then an explosion lit the woods in orange. She stopped, heart pounding, staring back through the trees. Smoke rose above the cabin. The man who had once led 24 SEALs into battle was fighting alone now. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself forward. She had a promise to keep and a truth to expose. By dawn, she reached the edge of a rural airfield, exhausted, clothes torn, hands shaking. She approached an old cargo pilot she knew from her Pentagon days, a man who owed her a favor. I need a flight, she said hoarsely, handing him a wad of cash. No questions. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Where to? She looked east, toward Washington. Home, she said. I've got ghosts to bury. The plane trembled in the wind as it crossed into the early dawn. Erin Shaw sat near the rear, eyes fixed on the horizon while gripping the small flash drive in her pocket as if it were a weapon. The pilot, an old friend named Cole, glanced over his shoulder. You're being hunted, Erin. Whoever's after you has reach. Military grade. I know, she said quietly. But if I don't get this data out, more soldiers will die for someone's paycheck. Cole nodded grimly. Then let's make sure it sees daylight. They landed at a rural airstrip outside Baltimore before sunrise. Erin thanked him, covered her face with a hood, and disappeared into the morning fog. Her body ached, her clothes were still damp from the forest, and her mind was running on pure adrenaline. She had one goal now, to expose the truth. The city was waking up by the time she reached Washington. Buses rolled down the avenues, joggers crossed bridges, and government employees walked into the same buildings that had betrayed her mission. Erin moved among them unnoticed, a ghost in her own world. She found refuge in a small safe house, owned by a retired journalist named Martha Keene, a woman who'd once investigated military corruption before being pushed out of the system. When Erin knocked on her door, Martha opened it slowly, frowning. Dr. Shaw? You look like hell. Good, Erin said. Because I've been through it. Inside, the two women sat across from each other at a wooden table cluttered with old files and half-burned cigarettes. I need your help, Erin began. I have evidence, proof that the SEAL ambush was an inside job. I want it to go public. Martha leaned forward, her journalist's instinct waking instantly. How solid is it? Solid enough to bring down half of Defense Command. The older woman smiled faintly. Then let's make some noise. For the next 48 hours, Erin barely slept. She decrypted, documented, and cross-referenced every file. Martha reached out to her old contacts in investigative media, those who hadn't yet been bought or silenced. But each time she sent a message, something strange happened. Their calls were traced, their emails intercepted, their accounts locked. They're monitoring every move, Martha muttered, frustrated. We can't send this digitally. You'll have to deliver it in person. Erin frowned. To who? Someone who still believes in truth. if we can find them. Then Martha hesitated. There's one man, Senator Raymond Hart. He's clean. He's been questioning defense budgets for years. If anyone would go public, it's him. Erin thought for a moment, then nodded. Then that's our man. By the third night, the air outside had turned thick with tension. A black sedan had been parked across the street since dusk, its engine off, its windows tinted. Erin could feel it, the watchful presence of the men who wanted her silenced. When Martha peered through the blinds, she whispered, "We've been made." Before Erin could respond, the front window shattered. Bullets tore through the living room. Both women dropped to the floor as glass rained down. "Get to the basement," Martha shouted. They crawled through smoke and splinters, reaching the cellar door. Erin's heart pounded in her chest, the sound of boots outside, the low murmur of radio chatter. Whoever they weren't amateurs. Martha handed her a backpack. Inside were the flash drive, a burner phone, and a small pistol. "Go, through the tunnel. It leads to the alley." Erin grabbed her hand. "What about you?" Martha smiled faintly. "Someone's got to buy you time." The last thing Erin saw before disappearing into the tunnel was the old journalist standing at the doorway, loading her shotgun with shaking hands. Erin emerged into the cold night, gasping for air. Behind her, the safe house erupted in flames. The explosion threw a wave of heat down the alley, forcing her to run, ducking between dumpsters and fences. By the time she reached the main road, she was covered in soot and blood. Martha was gone, and Erin was officially alone. She stole a car, hotwired it with trembling fingers, and sped toward Capitol Hill. She didn't know if the senator would see her. She didn't even know if she'd make it that far. But she had to try. Morning light broke over the city as she parked near the Capitol. She moved quickly through the crowds, her hood up, eyes scanning for tails. Every step felt like a countdown. She entered a side door, flashing an outdated government ID to the guard. "I'm here to see Senator Hart," she said firmly. "Tell him it's about Operation Ridgefall." The guard hesitated, then made a call. Moments later, Erin was escorted upstairs. Hart was waiting in his office, tall, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed. "Dr. Shaw. I've heard the name. You're the woman from the Afghan rescue." "That's not all I am," she said, placing the flash drive on his desk. "This contains classified files. Proof that the SEAL team was set up by people inside our own military. I need you to take it public." He studied her for a long time. "You realize what you're asking?" "I'm asking for the truth. Nothing more." Hart sighed, then inserted the drive into his laptop. His face went pale as he scrolled through the documents. "Dear God." "That's the cost of silence," Erin said quietly. He looked up. "If what's in here is real, this could destroy careers, maybe the whole department." "Then let it burn," she replied. "It's already burned enough good men." Hours later, as Hart made confidential calls to investigative committees, Erin sat in the hallway outside his office. She felt numb, exhaustion and grief mixing into one heavy silence. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice crackled through the static. "Doc, it's me." Her breath caught. "Blake?" "Yeah," he coughed. "Didn't think I'd make it, did you?" "Where are you?" She whispered, her throat tight. "Alive, barely. They hit the cabin hard. But I took a few of them with me. Been hiding since." "You get the files out?" "Yes. I'm with Senator Hart. He's moving on it." "Good," Blake said, weak but steady. "Because they won't stop. Not until this dies with us." "I'm not letting that happen," she said fiercely. "Not again." He chuckled softly. "That's my girl." Then the line went dead. By evening, word had started to leak. Whispers of corruption in the Defense Department reached the media. Anonymous files appeared online, files that looked a lot like the ones Aaron had given the senator. The truth was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. But that also meant her enemies were desperate. At dusk, as Aaron left the Capitol, a black SUV screeched to a stop beside her. Armed men stepped out, faces hidden. She froze, heart hammering. One of them spoke into a radio. Target acquired. Aaron turned and ran. Gunfire erupted across the street. Civilians screamed. She ducked behind a pillar, sprinted into a nearby metro entrance, and vanished down the escalator. Bullets sparked off the walls. She jumped the turnstile, rushed into a train just as the doors closed, and the car roared into darkness. Inside, passengers stared at her in shock. Aaron leaned against the wall, shaking, breathing hard. For the first time, she realized the full cost of her choice. There was no going back. She had become the whistleblower the government feared most, and now every shadow, every silence, could be the sound of someone coming to finish the job. When the train surfaced above ground again, sunlight hit her face. She looked out the window, the Capitol fading behind her. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. She didn't know if Blake was truly alive. She didn't know if Senator Hart could protect her. But one thing was certain. The truth was out. And sometimes, that's the loudest weapon of all. Aaron Shaw moved through the dimly lit streets of Baltimore at night, the flash drive heavy in her jacket pocket. Every shadow could be a threat. Every stranger, a watcher. She had been running for weeks, leaving safe houses and aliases behind, always one step ahead of the hunters who wanted the truth buried. But tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't running. She was going to fight back. Senator Hart had arranged a secret meeting at a secure government facility. The room was isolated, far from the press and the prying eyes of those who had tried to stop her. Aaron arrived, hooed low, and stepped into the reinforced steel doors. Inside, Hart waited with several top investigative journalists. On the table lay screens, laptops, and encrypted communication devices. Aaron's fingers brushed the flash drive. This was the moment. "We're ready," Hart said, voice low. "All the files have been verified. Once this goes live, there's no turning back." Aaron swallowed. "Are the seals safe?" "They know," Hart replied. "But some of them. They can't come forward publicly. Their safety depends on this being controlled." Aaron nodded. She understood. The world wouldn't see the full cost of the mission, but the truth would be impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A faint hum filled the air, unmistakable, mechanical. Aaron's eyes widened. "They found us," she whispered. Before anyone could react, the reinforced doors rattled as gunfire erupted outside. Security alarms blared. Men in tactical gear stormed the hallway. Aaron ducked behind the table, heart racing. Hart grabbed a secure tablet. "We've got minutes. Broadcast the files now." Aaron inserted the flash drive into the central system. The encrypted files began uploading to multiple secure journalist networks. Screens across the room lit up with names, ranks, and operation details. The story of the ambush, the betrayal, the deliberate endangerment of the SEAL team, all of it was now out of their control. The intruders burst into the room. Aaron's pulse pounded. She grabbed a side chair and hurled it at the closest attacker. Glass shattered. The man swore and recovered quickly. Gunfire echoed. Hart dove behind a console. Aaron rolled across the floor, grabbing a pistol from the drawer. Her hands were steady, her aim true, trained reflexes mixed with desperation. Each shot slowed the intruders, buying precious seconds. The files were almost fully uploaded. And then she heard it, a familiar voice over the comm channel in the intruder's earpieces. "Blake? Is that you?" Commander Blake stepped into view, rifle in hand. His uniform was torn, his face bruised from weeks of hiding and skirmishes. Erin's chest lifted with relief and disbelief. "Blake!" she shouted. He smirked, firing another round. "Took you long enough, Doc." Together, they fought through the room, side by side. Hart's team covered them, barricading the doors, keeping the remaining attackers at bay. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the stench of gunpowder. Every second the upload continued was another second closer to exposing the truth. Finally, the last of the intruders was incapacitated, and the files completed their upload. Erin exhaled, collapsing onto the floor, exhausted beyond measure. Blake knelt beside her, checking for injuries. "You okay?" "I will be," she said, finally allowing herself to breathe. "For the first time in weeks, I feel free." By morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines splashed across the nation. Whistleblower exposes secret SEAL ambush. Military faces unprecedented corruption scandal. 12 American heroes survived betrayal. The scientist who saved them speaks out. The Pentagon scrambled. Senators called emergency sessions. Defense contractors tried to spin the narrative, but the evidence was irrefutable. A mountain of classified documents, eyewitness testimonies, and encrypted communications. Erin and Blake watched the news from a safe location, surrounded by the remaining SEALs who had gone public under protective identities. Miller, the shrapnel-wounded SEAL who had joked about drinking with her months ago, raised a coffee cup. "To Erin," he said, "for saving our asses." "Twice," Erin smiled faintly, accepting the gesture. "To all of you," she replied, "for trusting me even when I wasn't one of you." But the victory was bittersweet. Internal investigations began immediately. Several high-ranking officers were placed under arrest. Contractors faced federal charges. The men who had ordered the ambush were exposed, though many tried to disappear behind legal loopholes and corporate shields. Even so, the SEALs were safe, and Erin had made sure of it. Blake looked over the small group, his expression softening. "You know," he said, "you weren't supposed to survive the valley. And yet, here you are, standing like you own the world." Erin shook her head, smiling faintly. "I don't own it, Blake, but I'm not afraid to fight for it." The SEALs laughed, the sound genuine and full of relief. They had been abandoned once, left to die. Now, the world knew the truth, and no one could deny the cost of betrayal. Weeks later, Erin returned home, finally able to rest. The Medal of Valor gleamed in her apartment, a symbol not just of heroism, but of resistance against corruption. She knew the fight wasn't over. The people who had betrayed her mission wouldn't vanish quietly. But for the first time, Erin felt like she could breathe. She had saved lives, exposed treachery, and proved that even one person could make a difference. Blake visited, sitting quietly on the couch. "Think they'll ever forget?" he asked. Erin shook her head. "No, but we'll make sure they never do." Outside, the sun rose over the city, golden light spilling over the monuments and reflecting off the Potomac. For Erin, for the SEALs, and for every life touched by the mission, it was a new beginning. Blake stood, looking out the window. "You know, Doc, if I had to choose one person to be stranded with in a valley, it'd still be you." She laughed softly, the sound free and unburdened. "And I'd still choose you, Commander." They stood there in silence, not needing words. The war was over. The truth was out. And the ghosts of the valley, the fear, the betrayal, the near death, had finally been laid to rest.